Okay, so this is going to be a fairly quick video, hopefully. I always say that, and it's always a lot longer than I plan. So I'm going to try to focus just on giving you a very general idea of what the program looks like, how it's structured, and what you're going to be doing on your end. There's other material that's part of the consult, so this isn't the entire consult, and I'll try to focus on just the things I can capture better if I explain them while we're here. But you'll also have a personal set of plans and a personal walkthrough and a lot of other info in a couple of other formats along with the consult. So there's several components to the consult. Right at the beginning of the email about the consult, there is a list. Do the following in this order, and there's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So make sure you go in that order just so that nothing is confusing. This will be one of the first things you do. I believe I have this as number 2 on your list. And this is just essentially to kind of give you a visual image of what you're going to be doing. So I use a very unique format for how I work with Tees and Hesse. And that's going to be the main focus here. So several years ago, and there's lots of long stories behind almost everything with how my program came to be, and I'm not going to go into the long stories on any of them, hopefully. But essentially, several years ago, I've been in tutoring or in the education realm for 13 years. Several years ago, I made a decision to specialize my career completely into entrance admission exams, which is primarily Tees and Hesse. Most of you that see this video are doing Tees or Hesse or possibly both. But there's others as well, and this program is structured so that no matter which of the admission exams you're taking, you will end up having content that is specific to whatever it is that you are trying to score high on. I may say Tees and not say Hesse, and just with this particular segment, everything I'm saying applies to any of these entrance admission exams. If I sent you this video, even if you're not taking Tees and you're taking something else, if I sent this to you, this all applies to you for this video. But it gets annoying if I keep saying Tees and Hesse and all the other ones and the CAP and the NET and the PACS. So I may just say Tees. That's the one that I've worked with the very, very longest. So I tend to default to saying that. But all of this applies to all of it. So when I decided to specialize my career into Tees and into nursing admission specifically, I basically set out to make the process of preparing for the Tees or the Hesse as easy as it can be and as effective as it can be. And again, very long story, made very short. I did a lot of different things. I tried a lot of different things. I had a lot of different programs along the way over several years, which puts me in a position now where I can truly say what I do now and what you're about to be doing to prepare for your exam is the best thing you can do to prepare for your exam. And it may be a departure from what you pictured, which is kind of the main reason why there's this visual interactive element to the consult, is so that I can do my best to explain how it does work if it's not what you're picturing and why it works that way. It is very important to acknowledge something about admission, nursing admission, the exams used for nursing admission. It's very unique in the academic realm because in most areas of academics, many of which I worked with prior to this and I still technically work with but don't work a whole lot with, like the ACT, the GED, the ASVAB to go into the military, all the different standardized exams that you've heard of over the years, they're very different than Tees and Hesse for a lot of reasons and in a lot of ways. But the important one is the motivation behind the people who produce the test that you're taking. With an entrance exam, they are trying very specifically, if you think about it and you put it bluntly, they're trying very specifically to have most people who take their exam, the T's, if they're the people who write the T's, which is ATI, they want most people who take it to fail. And that sounds terrible and harsh, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because it's a selection tool. So the T's is designed to basically select the top 5 or 10% of students who applied to a program. And again, I won't go off on a rant about how that's not exactly the best way to pick really good nurses. I'll stay away from that for now. But it's not obviously the best way to pick good nurses. And so this affects a lot of things. When ATI puts out the T's and when Elsevier puts out the HESI, you can tell by the board name of who wrote the test why I stick to T's, because ATI is a lot easier to say than Elsevier. When they put their exam out, they then put out prep materials. You probably know that. You probably have some of them. For example, so I'll show you what the official books are. This would be the official ATI book for the T's currently. And this would be the official book for the HESI. The camera moves oppositely from the direction that I'm moving. That's really weird. So they put out their test and then they put out their book. And in the last couple of years, ATI has put out a million other things. They've got everything from online learning modules that are pretty expensive to practice tests to books to, I think they even have like flashcard type things now. And those are put out by ATI. So most people assume, yeah, that's, this is how to prepare for the T's because these are the people who write it. So these are the people who know what's on it, right? And normally that would be a great strategy. Official sources are normally very accurate. They're normally pretty helpful. But in the case of T's and HESI, they are intentionally not super accurate and super helpful because if they were, they wouldn't do a good job of what they're out there to do, which is select a very small percentage of students out of all of those who take it and present a score to get into a program. So to keep that motive in mind has been very important for me for many, many years because that is the driving force behind how you have to design a program like this if you're in my position. And unfortunately, every other tutor that I know of or educator or program, some of the little prep things that they offer at some of the schools, pretty much everything I'm familiar with that's out there for the T's or the HESI, either one, uses this like this is very, very, very accurate and this is really what the test looks like. And that's unfortunate because if you have seen this book and you have taken the test, some of you haven't done either of those things and that's fine. You know that that's not accurate. This book is very broad. It's very general. It says just a little teeny bit about each thing. It does mention all the different categories that are technically considered to be on the test, but it doesn't elaborate much on any of them. It's a very basic, the integumentary system protects organs. And, a summary sentence is a sentence that summarizes. So it says some really basic stuff that's really not very helpful when it comes to the level that the T's is actually at, which is very complex, very, very unique questions covering very unique content, not content that you probably saw when you took your anatomy classes and your microbiology classes and all the reading and English you've done over all the years. None of the things you have done up to this point actually look anything like the T's. And again, it's a selection exam, so it has to be that way. That's how it has to work. They have to take reading and make it not what you've ever done in reading before, despite the fact that most of you have an incredible amount of experience with reading. So they have to make it kind of subjective. They have to make it unique. And they have to make it where it's difficult to figure out what they specifically want you to say a summary is or a logical conclusion using the reading example. because otherwise it would be too familiar to all of you, and then it would be too easy to pass it. And again, I could go on about that forever. Seriously, I could talk so much about that. But that's at the center of how and why I have wound up where I'm at. And it's at the center of how and why you are going to end up doing this in the manner that you're going to do this. As a note that is not necessarily leading into this next piece, I've shown you the 2 official books. If you have these, okay, I wouldn't recommend using them. Assuming that you start my program, assuming that you go through this consult process and you feel like this can and will help you get where you want to go, and you start up with my classes that I'm about to describe, assuming all of that happens, I strongly recommend for my students just to absolutely stay away from all of the sources that are out there. And that includes every publisher. And actually the other publishers besides ATI, besides the Elsevier and ATI books, are even worse. They're even more scary, because if I don't work at ATI and I want to publish a book that is sold in a public forum, for example, many of you either have or have seen this book. I'll keep my thoughts to myself for the most part about this book, but this is a pretty familiar one. This comes pretty highly recommended on a lot of websites and stuff, and sure, in the realm of what is available for teas, it's not any worse than anything else, but it is most certainly not accurate to the test. It's got a lot of extra stuff. It's got a lot of stuff missing, and it doesn't use the style of the teas really at all. These guys are a public publisher, which means they have to be very, very, very careful what they put out with regard to these exams, because it would be very easy for Mometrix, is who makes this book, to get sued by ATI or Elsevier if they put out a book that really did look like their exam. So what these guys do is actually the same thing that pretty much all of the tutors I've ever heard about or interacted with do, which is to take this book, to take the official book, outline what's in here. You could look at the table of contents of this book. In fact, I do the same thing when I write my curriculum, except there's a lot more to my process beyond it. Is I take the table of contents and I write down all of these things that are listed. I don't know if my camera will focus on that, but they list all the things they're going to talk about. And you just list this out. And if you want to put more information than what they've got in this teeny tiny little book, then you just kind of use their general guideline and what they do cover in their book, but you're kind of making it up. And the point that I'm making is these guys have never seen the teas. That their job is not to see the teas or take the teas. They don't talk to teas students who have taken the teas. They don't really care what's on the teas necessarily, other than just getting it generally right. And so these guys are making it up. These guys are just kind of randomly guessing what they should put in their book. It's worth noting this book is twice the thickness of this one. My hand moves the opposite way of what it looks like on the camera. There we go. So the secondary source, the one that's not from people who know what's on the test, is twice the thickness of the one who is from those who write the test. Because these guys make it a specific mission to just make sure they don't put very much information out there at all. And that is to prevent these guys from putting a lot of information out there, as well as to prevent you guys from just being able to just pick up this book, study it really hard, put a lot of time in, and get a 90% on the teas. Because if that were to happen very many times, somebody would replace ATI who could do a better job of not preparing students. I hope that makes sense, what I'm saying. And you know, it sounds negative, and it sounds like it's a doom and gloom situation and like it's a hopeless situation. And honestly, in a lot of contexts, it really is. But you're coming into the opposite of everything that I just said. So for you, it's not even really a concern that this is how this works. I just mentioned that because many of you have a set of study materials, a collection of study materials that might match up with what I just described. And if you have any other books that are not by the publishers that I happened to just demonstrate there, there's not a book that I could point out that's for TEAS or for HESI or for CAP or for NET or for PACS, any of them, any of the specific entrance exams. There is not a book that I am aware of that I would say, yes, I recommend that book, which is a very simple approach, because ultimately, if you do decide to start this program, everything you need will be provided as part of it, from the stuff you need to know, to the stuff you need to work on, to the stuff that you need to practice. So I do ask my students to please, please, please avoid other sources while you're in my program, because they can cause a lot of confusion for you. They can make you think you're missing something because you're seeing it in a book, but you're not seeing it in your class. They can make you study a whole bunch of stuff you don't need, or they can mislead you in terms of style, which is actually my greatest concern. Is if you're studying from one of the books that's published that says TEAS all over it, you're getting the wrong idea of style. And that's a really important aspect of entrance exams specifically. They're written in a very specific style. They're very unique in what types of questions they ask, what they ask the questions about, how they word it when they ask, and how difficult they make it to figure out which of the answer choices is right, which is how close the choices are to each other. So if you have 4 answer choices that are pretty much nothing like each other, it might be pretty easy to figure out which one's right. If you have 4 answer choices and you can barely even tell what makes A different from B, then that's really hard. And all of the elements that I just listed are absolutely critical when we're talking about TEAS, HESI, or admission exams in general. Super important to know that the style is absolutely a central part of what you have to know and what you have to get good at. With my program, everything is provided. It's also in a really unique format that makes it a lot easier for you to get from where you're standing now to where you want to be. Many of you have been referred to me by someone who took classes from me, took my program, passed their test as a result, got into school, and then said, hey, you should also check out this program. So a lot of you are kind of or very familiar with what I do or how I do it. Some of you aren't. Some of you that are watching this have probably pictured a one-on-one private tutoring scenario. And what I'm about to tell you is a total departure from that. It's like a completely different model than what you may have pictured. And I will explain very much how it works, what you're going to be doing. But it's also very important for those of you who did have an image of private tutoring in your head to know I did that for a long time. I did private tutoring for TEAS for many, 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 many years. Eventually the HESI came around maybe halfway through my career, and then I started doing private tutoring for HESI, and some of the other exams started to surface after that. And I mean, I got results out of that. I've always gotten results because I've always worked very, very, very hard to make good content for my students, to put the right practice with the right types of language and style and all of that in front of my students has always been a priority for me. So I certainly can't say, oh, back when I was private tutoring, my students failed the tests all the time. I definitely can't say that that is true. But I can definitely tell you that everybody who goes through my current program, the way it's now designed, gets exceptional results, and as an average, as a whole, much, much better results and much more consistent results come out of this than the private tutoring arena. And I kind of, it took me a long time to figure that out. Why is that? How is that possible? Private tutoring is supposed to be the greatest thing in education. A lot of people think of it that way anyway. And it's kind of weird that it doesn't work as well for TEAS and HESI. And it's not just me. The other people who I am familiar with on one level or another who do private tutoring for the TEAS or for the HESI also don't get very good results. And a lot of that is a lot of other factors. I am no better than anybody else at my core, but I do work very, very, very hard on knowing what's on the real test because I know the books don't have the right stuff, putting it in a good strategic format, putting it in front of you and explaining it in a way that makes sure that you know exactly what you're doing. There's a lot to being successful with TEAS and HESI. And truthfully, to my knowledge, the only program or method that's out there that's getting success for every student is the program that I've put together. And the reason that tutoring doesn't work kind of developed in my head over many years of understanding and researching how this all works. And I guess the best way you could say that I kind of figured that out is there's a really interesting specificity to the TEAS, meaning every time that you take the test, first of all, it looks totally different. They use something called Random Bank, which is like there's hundreds upon hundreds of questions you can be asked every time you sit down to take the test. And they're pulled randomly one by one. Your questions are selected as you're progressing through the test. So no two TEAS versions are the same. No two attempts for one student are the same. And they can be bigger or smaller differences, but they're always very, very different. Sometimes one attempt will seem a lot more difficult than another, or one attempt will seem a lot easier than another. There's a few factors to that, but part of it is that random question selection. With that comes what I've kind of started to coin the term moving goalpost. So the TEAS in particular, but definitely all of the entrance exams have this on their own scale, have moving goalposts. You think you figured out what you're good at and what you're having trouble with, but then you take the test again and it's totally different. Some of you have expressed this frustration to me specifically. If you have attempted the test multiple times, you've probably experienced this and you may have told me about it. Where you take the test and it looks like when you look at your first set of results, oh, I'm really good at this and I'm totally okay on this, but I'm really bad at this. And most students kind of use that to guide the way that they try to study for their next attempt. And then their next attempt looks completely different. All the things they did really, really, really well in the first time, they do really poorly in. All the things that they were really bad at, even the ones they didn't study for the next attempt, they do really well in. And it keeps happening again and again. Most students see between 20 and 30% variation from attempt 1 to attempt 2 to attempt 3 in their composite score. So that would be like taking the TEAS the first time and scoring a 60% and then taking it again and scoring a 40%. Or taking the TEAS and getting a 50 and then taking it and getting a 70, but then your third attempt might go back down to 60 or 50 again. This isn't something that happens to some students. This is something that happens to every student that I have run into, or at least almost every student that I have seen that has multiple attempts, especially the students who give me 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 score reports and I set them next to each other. They all have vastly different scores, overall speaking. They all have vastly different subject scores. One of them might have a very high science score, but the next one has a very low one. And then the next one's low, but then the next one's high. Even in the rare instance where I see the exact same score twice. So let's say you gave me 2 attempts and you got exactly 78% in math on attempt 1 and on attempt 2. If we pull up the list of specific question types that you missed, there's still actually going to be a tremendous difference. So you might have scored 78 and you scored 78 because you missed 2 questions in geometry and 1 in ratios. And then the next time you might get the exact same number for math, but your misses are different. They're percentages and rational number ordering or something totally different. If you've never taken the test that you're about to take before, you're hearing this kind of for the first time, you're not able to say, oh yeah, I had that exact situation happen, but it does happen very consistently with attempts. And that's kind of what I feel is behind the reasoning for private tutoring not being the best way to do it, and this structured full format program being the way that we do this, is the goalpost is always moving. So the best approach that we could possibly take to prep, whether you're really close to your final goal or whether you're super, super far from it and it doesn't even seem attainable, whether you've attempted the test 0 times or whether you've attempted it 10 times, regardless of those major differences, the best thing we could possibly do is get you exposure to every single component of the test, every type of question that can be asked on the test, every difficulty level it can come in, every variation or style difference you can see in it. If you can get through every single item, then we know for sure that you know exactly what they want in every single spot on every single question type. You have practiced every single kind of question. You've practiced every question in multiple formats and variations and difficulties. And then we know for sure, we know absolutely 100% that you know exactly what you're doing and what they want and what kind of tricks they might put in front of you and what to expect. And you have a strategy to apply to every type of question. We want you to walk into the test and every time a new question comes onto your screen, you say, oh, I recognize that. That's a question about this. And then you have a strategy and you can apply it to the question and you know you got the right answer and you know you got the answer they wanted. And then you get to do that again because the next question pops up. And again, you're like, yep, I know what that is. I'm going to use my strategy for that. And again, you know that you consistently got the right answer. That's like the dream scenario. And whether you've taken your test or not, you would probably agree with me that if you could walk into your test knowing everything that might come toward you, every way it might come toward you, exactly how to deal with it, exactly what they want, you would definitely be in the best possible position. With private tutoring, that's not possible, which is why now that I describe it that way, I'm able to actually reinforce that, and there's able to actually be something behind me that allows me to do that. With private tutoring, you're ultimately trying to basically choose areas that you think you need to work on because of the time limitations and the cost limitation. Private tutoring is much, much more expensive than my program format. Time is obviously, especially for a tutor like me, I take almost all of the TEAS and HESI students across the entire country. So for me, time is a major, major concern. I would have 1/10 as many students if I was seeing every one of them one-on-one and doing a tutoring type thing. And that would be okay if the results I was getting were better, but they would be a lot worse because we would be trying to guess maybe based on what you're usually good at or what you usually feel like you're not as good at. Your strength and weaknesses that you perceive from other experiences in your life, or we would be going off of a score report or a couple of score reports and trying to use those to pinpoint what you're better at, what you're not as good at. Both scenarios are really ineffective when it comes to TEAS and HESI. And they cause you to be kind of chasing your tail. You're trying to figure out what you should work on, and then you work on that, but the next time you see the test, you don't really have trouble with that, or you don't even see it because the questions rotate, so you might not even have that, but you have trouble with something else, and that something was something you didn't get to work on, which is the same concern with self-study. When you study by yourself, it's even worse than that because you're trying to pull stuff from 15 different places and figure out what's good and what's not good, what looks like the test, how to organize it, and then how to do it. And that's an even bigger mess. Most of you have attempted that on some level. Some of you, to an extreme extent, you've done a lot of that and put hundreds of hours into that. Some of you haven't. It doesn't matter whether you've done that or not, other than if you have done that, you're going to enjoy this more because you're going to know what else you could possibly be doing that could be so much more difficult. So what is the model that I use and what does it look like? The model of my entire way of thinking of prep for an admissions exam is exposure. Rather than try to get really good quality time in certain areas, I want you to be able to see every single thing. I want you to get to work in every single area, all the way from the most basic to the most advanced of each and everything. And there's tons and tons and tons of things on the test, as you know. But with this style and this format, it's actually possible to just go all the way from beginning to end, learn every single thing, all the different variations of every single thing, all the different styles, all the tricks that are written into them, and all of the difficulty levels. And you're looking at that actually on the screen right now. If you took these classes right here, there's 32 of those, just in case you're wondering. 32 core classes. I have a lot of things available, so the word core, I just kind of put in there to say that's kind of like the regular program. What we're looking at right now is TEAS, not HESI. They have different class lists. Some of the classes are the same, some of them aren't. If you are prepping for both tests, you don't have to completely redo everything for the second one. But they are unique. So we are looking at TEAS. I'm only looking at this as an example anyway. If you did these 32 things, each of these things takes about 2 hours to do. And if you did all 32 of them, you would be experienced in every single thing that can possibly be asked on your test. And it's that easy to do that. The problem, of course, historically has been time, because this is 64 hours. Which isn't actually that much time. It's a work week and a half for someone who works a normal full-time work week. But with private tutoring and all the logistical concerns, it's very, very hard to get any more than 15 to 20 hours in. So then you're only getting to maybe here. And that's where the pinpointing comes in. You're like, well, I think we should work on stuff from here. And maybe we work on this, and I think maybe we should work on that, and maybe some of this, and you're guessing. You are going to be on your own schedule here. These are in a class format. These are in a completely on-demand video version of a class format. I used to teach lecture classes live all day. They eventually got recorded. That's what makes up this program. Having them recorded has a lot of advantages in convenience and scheduling, so you can get these classes in, and you're going to be doing them over some kind of time frame. You might be doing them over, 3 weeks. You might be doing them over 3 months. That's one of the decisions that we make as part of Consult, or you might already have that decision made and you're going to choose your plan based on fitting it into the time frame that does exist. But this will be split up, so you'll see plans that look kind of like this. These are terrible lines. I'm just kind of showing you where here's your first week. You're going to do those 3 things. Your second week, you're going to do those 3. The third week, you're going to do those, and so on. And you'll be on a consistent pace of some kind. If possible, we want you to get to every class. There are some of you who have a very imminent test date and you won't get to do every class. But for the most part, if you've got a fairly normal, fairly open time frame, we want you to get to all of the things that are showing right now. And it's on your schedule. So you decide, 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up before I go to class and I'm going to take my Reading 1 class, because that's when I want to do it. That's your complete and total prerogative in the program, other than you'll have a set number that you need to do per week or per day, depending what your pace looks like. So you have a guidance as far as how quickly you should be pacing, which is also a guidance as to how much you need to do each week, or if you have a really intensive pace because you're testing very soon, how much you need to do each day. As far as the actual class, it is in a totally accessible format to you. You will either be doing your class purchases weekly or upfront. You'll either buy all your classes once you've chosen a plan and they'll all be ready to go from day one, or you'll buy them weekly. And so if your first week is supposed to be these 3 classes and your second week is these 3, you will send me a message 24 hours before you intend to start those, requesting them. You'll pay for just that upcoming week. You'll have these, then you can take them whenever you want to. And then before you're going to start up these classes, again, 1 day or more before you're ready to start, you'll send me a message requesting these, and then you'll have access to them. It all works through email. There's a lot more detailed info in a lot of other places, and I don't want to focus this intro video on that. But you'll basically go into your email and be able to pull up the packet and the video class for whatever you need to do that day. You'll have either a week's worth of those sitting there waiting for you or more if you decide to do more. There's 2 types of classes. There's 2 structures. You're going to do a combo of them. And between the 2 things, in doing a combo of the 2 things, you're going to cover everything that needs to get covered, and then you're going to get practice and simulation, and we're going to know where you're scoring, and we combine them in a way that allows us to do that. The first class type that you're going to run into is a lecture class. I'll put a little square around the lectures. Each subject has a different number of classes, as you can kind of see. Just depends on how I feel that I need to split up the information. With science, it's content, it's information about what you're supposed to know and how you're supposed to expect it to look. Whereas with reading or with English, it's more strategic. It's here's the kinds of questions that they can ask, and here's what the passage looks like and how to put those together. With a lecture, so I'll write lectures on here so that you remember that's what's circled. And you notice there's really, along the way here, there's not a whole lot that I don't have boxed right now, just these. Lectures will make up the vast majority of what you do. The lecture is where you actually learn what you need to learn. Practice questions are great, but they don't do anything for you until you have learned what it is you're looking for and what it is you're practicing, and you have some type of strategy behind them. So the lectures set out to say, here's what is on the test. Here's a few of the question types per class. Here's what they look like. Here's how to answer them. Here's a bunch of practice. Here's another group of possible questions. Here's how to recognize them, and so on. With a lecture, you will be sent 2 things with any class, actually. Each and every class, each item on this list, each one of these things has a packet and a video. The packet can be printed, should be printed if at all possible. It definitely helps to have it actually sitting in front of you. So you want to print it before you go to play the video. Don't look ahead, don't work ahead. It's not designed where you're supposed to do the packet first, because then you wouldn't be learning anything, and you'd be answering the questions the same way you've always answered them, rather than me providing you with better guidance. So the idea is you print the packet, you set it in front of you, it's totally blank, you haven't even looked at it, and then you pull up your video, you play your video, and as your video plays, it's going to tell you, here's the question types we're going to talk about in this particular class. Here's what they look like. Here's how we recognize when they're in front of us on the test, which of course includes here's all their different styles and variations. And ultimately, here's a strategy. Every single lecture has strategy in it. It might have a whole bunch of different ones in one lecture. There might just be one. It depends on how it fits in the structure of everything else. But I'm not a traditional educator in any way, and I don't believe in traditional education in any way. And I believe you need a plan and a strategy and steps that you follow to do any or all of these things on this test. So you're always going to have a plan for how you approach every given question type. And then you're going to get to practice that a whole lot so that it's not hard for you to remember what that plan is. And it's not hard for you to implement that plan differently on an easy question versus a hard one, and so on. There are varying numbers of lectures because they're put together however it works in the time of the class. So each class takes about 2 hours. That includes all or most of your homework time, your practice time after the class. So each one of the lecture videos is about an hour and a half long, give or take. And in that hour and a half, we will always, for the first half of that time, we will always talk about how to find and identify and recognize the question, and then what strategy to use and how to use it and how to get good at it. So the first half is the, I guess the learning part of it is what you would say. That sounds kind of silly, but in all seriousness, prior to us practicing, we learn a new way of doing it, and we get a plan in place, and we get you to where you recognize that this is what you have in front of you, and then you implement a procedure that works well to consistently get you the right answer. The second half of the time is usually one demonstration from me of how the strategy looks when we implement it. Possibly a couple of demonstrations if it looks very different when you're on a really easy question versus a really hard one. Sometimes it doesn't. And then the rest of the time, so probably a little under half of the time in the class, you will be practicing with me. And it's hard to describe the videos before you've seen them. It's hard to describe how interactive they are because obviously I'm not actually there. So you don't imagine it being as interactive as it actually is. But you will be working with me because we will talk about the questions and the strategies. I'll show you how I do it. And then you will actually do a particular set of questions or a particular exercise. You'll pause the video, or the video will have a pause that's built into it. And you will do the same passage was doing at the time I recorded the video. And then you'll play your video while you've got your strategy implemented and all your notes done and your questions answered. And you'll immediately find out how you did on each of those questions that you just did, how you did on implementing the strategy. I will walk back through the strategy so that you can say, yes, I nailed that perfectly, or no, I did kind of a bad job on this part or that part. The first time you implement a strategy, you could very well be a little clunky. And that's why the classes are designed to the length that they are, is you're going to practice it several times. We're going to start on the easiest example, then go to a little harder and a little harder and really hard. And if there's anything super weird that you could end up running into, we'll go into that. And then by the time it is done, by the time the video interactive lecture part of it is done, you will be ready to implement your strategy on your own. So you'll be ready to kind of practice it and get it a little better memorized so that you don't forget the steps of your strategy, and get some simulation and some practice. That's what the homework does. I'll end up running back through that very quickly at the end. So as soon as you have done all of the lectures that go in one of the sections, so here's all of the reading lectures. I've got all of them boxed. Here's all the English lectures. How many there are just depends, but it will look like this unless TEAS is not the test that you're doing. When you've done all your reading lectures, which in the case of reading is 6 different lectures, once you've done all the reading lectures, you're going to have everything down for reading. You're going to be familiar with every single thing that you would need to know to do well on the reading test. You've seen all the question types. You've practiced all the question types. Now you're ready to find out, am I where I think I am? And where would I score if I walked in and took the TEAS reading today? And that is what the next class type, the mock, I'll change the color of my pen so that we can see this clearly. So here's my mock, and you'll notice that after each segment of lectures, there's a mock. And that will tell you, before you go from reading on to English, where are you scoring? If you've previously taken the test, you'll be able to see what is my improvement approximately, of course, because you would vary every time you took the test. But if you were scoring in the 40s on reading and you're now in the 80s, then you know that you have made the improvements probably that you needed to make. This also gives you simulation. Anytime that I say simulation, the content that I put in my classes as well as my mocks, but especially my mocks, is content you could really bump into. So instead of just very randomly throwing reading passages in front of you, I choose content that's actually talked about on the test. I don't put the actual passage unless it's publicly available because that's copyright violation, but I do give you something that is very similar so that you're not just practicing all your strategies and bringing it all together, but you're also actually getting some exposure to what you should really seriously expect. Same would go for HESI on the HESI mocks. Those are totally separate, totally different mocks. The HESI mocks look just like the HESI, TEAS mocks look just like the TEAS, and so on. Each subject, you'll do all your lectures, which could be anywhere from 3 to 9, and then you'll do your mock. And this is a progress mock for obvious reasons I call it that. That's to tell you how you're doing along the way. When you get to the end of all of your subjects and you've done all lectures in all areas or whatever you are going to do as part of the plan that you choose, you'll get to here. And this is a final mock set. That is your final week. Everybody does this. It's part of every plan unless you're doing a really, really restricted plan. This will tell you right before you test. So you're reaching this point in your final week of prep, give or take, and this will tell you where you are score-wise, what you should expect to score. It'll give you continued exposure and continued simulation to the test, but ultimately it will give us a score. Again, tons of variation from attempt to attempt, but a lot less variation when you're done with these classes. You'll have it much more dialed in where it doesn't vary much. So you should see a very similar score here as you saw in these. And if you decide to do extra mocks, which is all of these that are listed down here, these are optional on every plan. There's no plan that has them as a required element. You can buy up to 4 sets of them. They're just like the final mock set, except more passages that you haven't seen yet, more questions that you haven't seen yet. Within the 6 different versions of mock sets that I have, the one you do that's along the way, the one you do at the end, and all the extra ones, essentially everything that can be on the test is captured. So if you do every mock I have, you have totally seen everything you could possibly want to see to simulate what it's going to be like to sit for the test. You don't have to do every extra mock set. You don't have to do any extra mock sets. Certainly, if you are trying to score in the 90s, I strongly, strongly recommend it because you have a very small margin of error, and the more you can be exposed to ahead of time, the better. Plus, that gives us more scores to be more certain that you actually are in that high of a range. If you're wanting to be in the 80s, I would at least try to get an extra set or 2 in. If you're trying to be in the 70s, you're a little closer to maybe not having to do them, but I do recommend them for everyone because confidence is important. And if you feel like you've seen a lot of what you need to see and more of what you need to see, you're going to feel better walking into your test. And even if that's the only reason to do it, that's a huge component of how you actually end up scoring. So I'll walk back through that because that's a lot of information. This is also walked through in your written packet. There is a packet called Important Program Info, and I cannot possibly emphasize how important that info packet is. I cannot properly emphasize that. You have tons of pages in there. I apologize. It's a lengthy packet, just like I'm a lengthy speaker. But it's really important because it has everything from how to get the most out of the purchase of your classes by getting all of your sequences right and staying away from material that will confuse you, and just all the do's and don'ts, basically. I think that's what the document is actually called, do's and don'ts for extra success with your classes. Placing an order, how to actually obtain classes, how to tell me which way you're going to go with everything so that I can get on the same page with you and we can get your classes out. That's got its own page. There are some policies involved with the program itself, with working with me, that are in there. My communication policy is one of them. It says any given thing you send me could take 24 hours to see a response for. So if you sent me an order, you always want to be 24 hours ahead of when you actually want the order in front of you, ready to go. It doesn't usually take me that long, but it can. And if you send me questions related to academic material, especially if you send me a lot of them, you may wait up to a week to see those back. It depends on how incredibly busy I am. I am always unbelievably busy. I work 90 to 100 hours a week, and it's not enough time for me to get to everyone and everything. So there is a hierarchy for how I process things. Orders and key requests, and the key would be how you would check your packet after your lecture before you're going on to your next lecture, which is also specified in the info packet. Those are always first, because if I don't process keys and orders first, I have students actually stuck because I'm not getting back to them. So class questions and mock scores, where we're looking to do an average, you're going to send me your mock scores because I'm going to weight them appropriately to how the test is really scored for your particular test. Those might take a bit longer. They don't take a week, but they'll take a bit longer. Questions from class will take the longest, because I won't answer somebody's question from something that they missed in English 3 if it's at the expense of somebody getting their classes so that they can keep progressing, if that makes sense. That's explained in there as well. There's a ton of information in that packet. I can't even think of what all the pages are. It goes back through the lecture versus the mock style, and when you print and when you watch your video and how you get your answers, and all of that kind of stuff is all in there. So read through that entire information packet. You can do that before or after reviewing your specific plans. Those are in 2 different attachments. So you can open up your plans and see if you're ready to make a decision on plan first and then read the info, or vice versa. But before you place an order, make sure you've read everything in the important information packet, because placing an order, you're agreeing to the policies and terms and response times and all the things that are in that packet. And I'm assuming that you're aware of all of those things before I'm charging you a dime. So very quickly walking back through this, if you totally understood everything I said and you don't want a quick review, you can cut me off right here. If you do want a quick review, I will do a quick walk back through. There's actually a document called Classes Outline, I believe, in the info packet. The info packet, I can't even tell you how important the info packet is, and it's probably obnoxious to have to read that whole thing. I'm sorry for that, but it's got a lot of info. There's a page, I believe it's called the outline. It definitely has the word outline in it, that walks you back through this in a written form. So you're going to do a collection of lectures and mocks. You're going to notice that your plan is divided up in some way over some number of weeks. That's a lot of the decisions are going to be your decisions of how long do you end up wanting to study over, which will affect how many classes you do per week. And when you're looking at your plan, you'll see it divided up into weeks rather than subjects. And you could have weeks fall in really weird places. Like if I keep going with what I'm doing here, you take all your reading lectures in week 1 and 2, but your mock reading happens to happen at the beginning of week 3. So there's not a subject organization to it. It's literally just a pace where we split the 32 classes over some amount of time, and they come out how they come out. You can either order classes weekly or upfront. If you order them upfront, they're all in your email inbox on that day, or the next day whenever I get it processed. If you order weekly, you always need to be 24 hours ahead of me. So if you intend to start reading 4 at the beginning of week 2 on Monday, you need to send me that request by Saturday if possible, or Sunday, just to make sure you get it in time. The lectures, so there's lectures and mocks. With a lecture, you're going to actually learn the material and strategy and then practice it. You're going to print the packet first. That's going to be the very first thing that you do, is print the packet, which will be in an email. The packets and the links are not necessarily in the same place, but you'll have an email that is your packets specifically. You'll print the packet that is titled according to the class that you're trying to take. So if you're about to take Reading 1, there will be a packet called Reading 1 or something very, very close to that, where you can tell that's the class it goes with, and you'll print that up. You will not look at it or work through it or do anything with it other than printing it up and putting it in front of you. You'll start up your video, and everything else is handled because you'll be told exactly which parts of the packet to use while you're in class, and then whatever's left is what you do after class. When you finish the lecture, you've learned everything about that group of questions, whatever was covered in that lecture, and then you'll request a key for it so that you can see where you're at. From a mental standpoint, you'll probably at least kind of know. I mean, if you really struggle with a class or you find it relatively easy, that will stand out and you'll already kind of know that. But then requesting the key will allow you to specifically check each answer and review your strategy for anything that you missed. If you missed something, I recommend going back through the strategy and seeing if you can find where you missed it. If you're consistently seeing anything missed, maybe go back through the lecture. You can watch them as many times as you want, anytime you want. You can rewatch just part of the lecture, whatever makes sense for you. That's part of the format and how it works, is you can do whatever you need to do to get the most out of the lectures once you've bought them. And then when you get your key done, you are on to the next class. You don't have to wait for the key to start the next class. So you don't have to key Reading 1 before you start Reading 2. They're independent from each other. At the time that a lot of these were recorded, people didn't even take them in order to begin with. So there's not a huge urgency behind having them in some particular sequence. So you can move on with your plan and then key something later. We try to get the keys out as quickly as possible. I have an assistant that does keys and sometimes orders for me. We try to get them out pretty quick. But if you're ready to go to Reading 2 and you were planning on doing it right now and you don't have a key, there's nothing wrong with going on. When you get through all of the lectures that go with a section, you'll know you're through all of them because you'll see mock reading after all the readings, or you'll see mock English. When you reach the point where it says mock and the subject you've been working on, you're done with your lectures. You've seen everything and worked on everything, and then you'll take the mock. With the mock, so with lectures, it's print the packet and then play the video, and those go together. Print, packet, play video right at the same time. With mocks, you're actually going to print the packet. The mock is a test. Then you're going to take the test. So a mock is a practice test. It's not something where I'm teaching you. It's something where you're testing out your strategies and implementing them on a mock version of your test. So you'll print up the test, you'll take the test, then you'll watch the video. There is still a video because the video is the key. I don't do, some things are going to change about this with new curriculum. At the moment, every key to a lecture class is written, and every key to a mock class is video. There is no written key for a mock class. Because if you have a written key, you'll just key your answers and you won't listen to my crazy rants about how to make sure you never miss this question because of this, this, or that. So putting the time into my walkthrough of each question, its answer, where its answer comes from, how you use the strategy to get it, where you might have messed up, if it's a common question that gets missed, all of that is in the video that goes with a mock. So it's not just a test. That's why it's charged like it's a class, as it is a class. It is a test followed by a class. So the lectures, you just print the packet and play the video right away. With a mock, you print the packet, you take the test, so you get to practice all your strategies, and then you watch the video. When you get through all 4 of your subjects, or if you're doing HESI, you'll have a different number of subjects, then you'll take a mock test all together. This one, the final mock, you're going to print all of that up and take it in one 3.5-hour sitting, just like the way the test actually works. So you're going to take mock reading and then immediately take mock math, immediately take mock science, and immediately take mock English. By the time you've done all that, I so don't think you're going to want to sit there and watch all those videos right away. So usually people do the final mocks over 2, maybe 3 days, where you take the whole test. That needs to be done in one sitting so that you simulate the test. But then you can, take a couple days or a few days to watch all the videos, grade all the tests, review all your missed answers, ask me any questions, all of that. You don't have to do that all in one day. But rather than taking this and then watching it, taking that and then watching it, I recommend taking all the subjects in one big packet, in one big sitting, so that you simulate the length of time that you're sitting at the test and the way that the subjects are ordered when you're sitting at the test. This was definitely longer than I meant it to be. I apologize. There's still tons of information. There's all kinds of detailed information. The idea of this is just to kind of give you a general visual image of what you're going to be doing and how it works, and you're going to pick out a plan, so you're going to know more specifically how this part of it is going to go once you've done that. There's lots of info that's very specific about how to actually get your classes and use them and all that in the info packet. There'll be a separate video at some point for that. I don't currently have it, and I don't currently plan on immediately making it. But it is in the info packet. Everything you need to know is either in the body of the email that I just sent you, or it's in the info packet. And then this video and your other video, which is your personal walkthrough, will pretty much describe kind of everything at a bigger, broader, general scale. If you have questions, let me know. Make sure you read through the info packet, because most of your questions are probably answered there, and then you're not waiting on me. Once you have figured out which plan you want to do, you are ready to start. Send your request as soon as you know what your request is. So if you're like, I'm doing plan 2, I'm ready to start, and I want to buy them all up front, and you know that, as soon as you know that, send that email out so that you can begin the process of waiting for me to see that and get it processed and get it out to you, and then you can start your classes quicker. So let me know if you have any specific questions. Read through the info packet, pretty please. I apologize for the length of it, and I will talk to you soon.